The Zathran hunting nets were designed to kill, not capture, woven from molecular filament that tightened with every movement. They were deployed across the forest moon of Vendara III to catch anything foolish enough to wander into their killing fields. The galactic community had long since abandoned such barbaric methods, but the Zathran cared little for civilized opinion. Jareth Torlil hadn't expected to find anything alive in the nets. She moved through the bioluminescent undergrowth with practiced silence, her survey scanner humming softly against her hip. The Terran Ecological Preservation Corps had sent her to document the damage before filing formal complaints with the Galactic Council, complaints that would likely be ignored, as they always were. Humans were still newcomers to the galactic stage, their voices carrying little weight among species who had sailed between stars for millennia. The sound reached her first, a low, keening whine that spoke of pain and terror in a universal language. Jareth froze, her hand instinctively moving to the plasma cutter at her belt. She knew better than to approach an injured animal, especially on a world where everything seemed designed to kill efficiently, but something in that cry pulled at her. Bypassing logic and speaking directly to something deeper, she found it in a clearing where 3 of Vendara's moons cast overlapping shadows. The cub was roughly the size of a Terran wolf, its 6 legs tangled hopelessly in the molecular net. Its fur, if it could be called fur, rippled with chromatic patterns that shifted from deep violet to angry crimson. 4 eyes, arranged in pairs on either side of its elongated skull, tracked her approach with predatory intelligence, far beyond what any cub should possess. It was a Curvath. Even Jareth, with only 6 months on Vendara, recognized the apex predator of this moon. Adults stood 3 meters at the shoulder and hunted in packs that could bring down armored vehicles. They were classified as extreme threat by every survey team that had ever studied them. The Zathran hunted them for sport and for the prestige their hides brought. The cub snarled as she approached, bearing rows of crystalline teeth that could probably shear through her EVA suit without much effort. The net had cut into its flesh in a dozen places, the molecular filament designed to tighten indefinitely. In another hour it would be dead. "Easy," Jareth murmured, knowing the creature couldn't understand her words but hoping her tone might convey intent. "I'm not going to hurt you." She studied the net's configuration, her engineer's mind cataloging the problem automatically. The filament responded to tension and motion. Trying to cut it conventionally would only make it tighten faster. But humans had dealt with similar security systems back on Earth, during the resource wars. There was always a way to beat a system if you understood its parameters. Jareth pulled a small device from her kit, a resonance disruptor designed for dismantling Zathran sensor grids. She'd modified it extensively during her months on Vendara, adding functionality that the original designers had never intended. If she could match the molecular vibration frequency of the net's filament. The cub snapped at her as she knelt beside it, teeth clicking centimeters from her faceplate. She didn't flinch. Fear was a luxury she'd learned to live without during her years working disaster sites across human space. The cub could kill her or it couldn't, but that wouldn't change what needed to be done. She activated the disruptor. The effect was immediate. The filament began to vibrate at a frequency that disrupted its molecular bonds, and the net started to dissolve like morning frost under sunlight. The cub thrashed once, then seemed to understand that stillness served it better. Jareth worked methodically, dissolving each strand that bound the creature, her movements calm and precise. When the last filament fell away, the cub exploded into motion. Jareth had just enough time to think that she'd made a fatal miscalculation before the creature stopped. It stood 3 meters away, chromatic fur rippling through a spectrum of colors she couldn't name, all 4 eyes fixed on her with unsettling intensity. They regarded each other in silence. Jareth could see the intelligence burning behind those alien eyes, a awareness that transcended simple animal cunning. The Curvath were classified as presentient by Galactic Survey, their cognitive capacity just below the threshold required for recognized sapience. Looking at this cub, Jareth suspected that assessment might be tragically wrong. "Go on," she said softly, gesturing toward the forest. "Your pack is probably looking for you." The cub tilted its head in a gesture that was almost human in its curiosity. Then it sat, wrapping its 6 legs beneath itself in a posture of patient waiting. Jareth completed her survey work with the cub following 3 meters behind her. Every attempt to shoo it away was met with that same patient, immovable presence. When she returned to her camp, The cub settled just outside the perimeter of her sensor net, its chromatic fur now displaying patterns of deep blue and gentle violet. She named it Prism, though she told herself the name didn't matter, that the cub would return to its pack any day now. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The cub grew but never left. The Zathran hunting parties learned to avoid the human survey zones. Stories spread among them of the lone Terran who walked with a Curvath at her side, a partnership that shouldn't exist between prey and predator. The hunters called it unnatural, a perversion of the proper order. Jareth called it friendship. On the day she completed her survey and prepared to leave Vendara III, Prism, now nearly full-grown and magnificent in its alien glory, pressed its head against her palm. The gesture transcended species, transcended evolution itself. It spoke of bonds formed not through dominance or utility, but through a single act of compassion when compassion wasn't required. The Galactic Council eventually approved Jareth's request to keep Prism as a companion, though their regulations had no framework for such a partnership. Humans, they noted in their official documentation, had a peculiar tendency to befriend the universe's most unlikely creatures. Years later, when Jareth stood before the Council to argue for Curvath reclassification as a sentient species, Prism stood beside her, living proof that intelligence took many forms, and that sometimes the most dangerous predators recognized and remembered kindness. The galaxy was still learning what humanity had always known. Compassion wasn't weakness. It was the strongest force in the universe, capable of bridging gaps that evolution had spent millions of years creating. One small act of mercy and the trajectory of 2 lives, and eventually 2 species, had changed forever. Retry HJ.